Whenever there's a mass shooting, half the country says, hold on, this is not the time to talk about gun control. The other half says that this is the perfect time to talk about gun control. Well, there hasn't been a national tragedy in a while, and the other day a presidential candidate went and said this.
Hillary wants to essentially abolish the Second Amendment. By the way, and if she gets to pick her judges, nothing you can do, folks. Although the Second Amendment people, maybe there is, I don't know.
So you know what? I think it's time we went ahead and talked about guns. First, we're going to have to go ahead and look at the Second Amendment, the Holy Grail itself.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
The second half of that amendment is all anyone ever talks about because it's nice and simple. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, period. However, the first half is incredibly important because it explains why. This is the only amendment that explains why it exists. The First Amendment, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. No reason, just because. Fifth Amendment, no person shall be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, because YOLO. Along with all of the other amendments, no reasons are given. They're just granted to the people because the framers thought they should be. But for the second, they felt compelled to put a reason, so it's probably worth giving that reason some thought.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. A strict interpretation of this phrase would mean that arms are only meant for the army, or at least the militia. A more liberal interpretation would be that all capable citizens should be armed and ready to answer the call should the need arise. Either way, the right to bear arms is federally guaranteed under the Constitution in order to provide for the defense of the state, whether that be by the military, a militia, or the citizenry themselves. The relevancy of a ready citizen militia when we have a standing army and reserves is up for debate, as well as whether the citizenry is responsible or even capable of that defense.
You must construct additional pylons.
But some feel that because of the wording of the Second Amendment, owning a gun inherently means you have the responsibility to help defend the state, and that owning a gun isn't simply for show. In other words, to own a gun is to agree to defend the state.
Whether invasion by foreigners, or aliens, the meaning of the phrase is clear. The people should be armed and ready to come to the defense of the state should the need arise. I hope you paid attention to the way I phrased that.
Again, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The Second Amendment was written so that the citizens would be armed and prepared to come to the defense of the state. The idea that the framers would include some sort of reset or self-destruct button in the Constitution, or that they meant for the Second Amendment to protect the people from their own future tyranny, is idiotic at best.
There is no way to interpret the Second Amendment as a way for the citizens to defend themselves from the state. It's for the security of the state, because a well-regulated armed militia is necessary for the security of a free state. So what about owning guns for hunting or for sport? Interestingly, this right is not given to you by the federal constitution or any federal law, but it's also not illegal. So like I said in my Bill of Rights video, this falls under the 9th and the 10th Amendment and is left for the states to decide.
Would you like to know more?
Each state has its own regulations regarding what you're allowed to hunt, when and where, and what kind of weapons you're allowed to use. In 1777, Vermont became the first state to guarantee the right to hunt to its people in its constitution. It wasn't until Alabama in 1996 that any other state did the same. Since then, 19 other states have adopted constitutional amendments guaranteeing the right to hunt. Even states without amendments like this still regulate hunting and sport shooting through a menagerie of laws that would take way too long to explain even for one state. As the only fact that I mentioned in my Bill of Rights video about the Second Amendment, the entire game changed in 2008 when the Supreme Court decided that the individual does have the right to own a firearm for home defense. This doesn't mean that anyone who owned a firearm before that is some sort of felon who just never got caught. It just means that that right wasn't interpreted until it came before the court. Another interesting interpretation of the text comes from the second half. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, when it comes to something intangible like what's given in the First Amendment, like freedom of speech, it's obvious. They can't limit what you're allowed to say, except when they can. But when it's real, like what's in the Sixth Amendment, in all criminal prosecutions the accused shall enjoy the assistance of counsel for his defense, it's a little different. As I said in my last video, it wasn't until 1963 that this right was interpreted to mean that if you couldn't afford one, the state would provide one for you. And now that the Second Amendment means that you have the right to keep a personal firearm for home defense, what if you can't afford one? Well, if this was an attorney for trial defense, the state would provide one for you, so why would it be any different for a firearm? Shouldn't the state provide you one of those too? The obvious answer to that question is no. If you answered it any other way, you're going to disagree with the rest of my video, so go ahead and save yourself the headache and stop watching the video now. If you think that guns should only belong in the hands of those who want them, or at least those who are qualified to carry them, then you're talking about gun control. Everyone agrees that there should be a line somewhere. Let me rephrase that. Everyone who's still watching this video agrees there should be a line somewhere. If you think that the right to bear arms means that ordinary citizens should be able to keep and bear nuclear weapons, what are you doing? I told you to stop watching like 10 seconds ago. So most sane people agree that nuclear weapons, tanks, anti-aircraft missiles, these things shouldn't be allowed in the hands of ordinary people. Even liberal supporters of the Second Amendment agree that handguns, shotguns, and hunting rifles should be allowed. The problem is somewhere in the middle. We have to draw the line somewhere between the weapons a normal citizen should be able to access and those reserved for the military. Even when we're in this gray area, at the top we have automatic weapons, or machine guns. Again, most people agree that the average citizen has no practical use for owning such a weapon. Even this guy.
I do not believe in taking away the right of the citizen to own guns for sporting, for hunting and so forth, or for home defense. But I do believe that an AK-47, a machine gun, is not a sporting weapon or needed for defense of a home.
So we basically just narrowed the gray area down to assault rifles, and that's where most of the debate centers around today. People aren't really advocating for the allowance of machine guns, and they're not trying to take away your hunting rifles either, despite what your preferred biased media source might try to tell you. Just really quick, they said Obama wanted to take away your guns, and more guns have been sold under his presidency than any previous presidency. In fact, since 2002, every year, more guns have been sold than in the previous year. Despite what Trump said in the beginning of this video, Hillary Clinton has made no claims to want to abolish the Second Amendment either. But back to the assault weapons debate. First, let's get one thing clear. Guns are for killing. Plain and simple, undeniable. And I'm talking about firearms here, not BB guns or air guns. Those are toys. You would actually have to try so hard to kill someone with one of those, you might as well have just used your bare hands. But whether we're talking about animals or people, guns are for killing. Guns are manufactured with only one purpose. Knives are a cutting tool that could be used to kill. Hammers are a construction tool that could be used to kill. Cars, on the other hand, are a transportation tool that could be used to kill. But guns only have one purpose. Unless you consider scaring someone into thinking that you kill them into a secondary purpose, the deterrent factor. But otherwise, if you use a gun in any other way, like a hole punch or something, you're actually misusing it. Guns only have one purpose. Alright, first coat done. Anyway, most people consider handguns and shotguns to be perfectly reasonable home defense weapons. Hunting rifles are perfectly legitimate ways to kill animals. Assault rifles, on the other hand, only have one purpose: killing people. They're designed for the military, not hunting, and in fact make horrible hunting weapons. Always do 2 coats. The ladies will know if you don't. Hunting rifles fire a bullet that passes through the animal cleanly. You'll often kill the animal with one shot. Assault rifles, on the other hand, do not. The M16, M4, and most common version of the civilian AR-15 uses a 5.56mm round that tumbles and even fractures on impact. This is by design to inflict the most internal damage as possible while using the fewest bullets. Most of the time there is no exit wound. An AK-47 is a little different because its rounds are a slightly larger 7.62mm, but the concept is basically the same. This is where many people and politicians get the terms wrong. An assault rifle is actually a low-powered weapon. If you shoot a deer with an AR-15, not only will you have to shoot the deer multiple times because the tiny bullets won't do enough damage, but you've also ruined the meat by shredding it and quite literally peppering it with lead. Assault rifles only have one purpose: killing people. Not only that, but to kill as many people as possible as quickly as possible. It's designed for the military, folks. Wax on, wax off, I guess. If you own an assault rifle and all you ever do is shoot paint cans or use it for home defense, that's like owning a Lamborghini and never going over 40. You're not fooling anybody, we all know what it's used for, and that's way too much power for what you need it for. So now that we've established that, let's talk about the assault weapons ban. President Reagan, the champion president of the NRA, Bush Sr., and Bill Clinton all supported an assault weapons ban. One was finally passed in 1994, but included an expiration date of 2004. This is George W. Bush in 2004.
I made my intentions, my views clear. I did think we ought to extend the assault weapons ban, and was told the fact that the bill was never going to move.
You heard that correctly. He was for extending the ban. Obama was for reinstating it. Every sitting president for the last 30 years has been against ordinary citizens having assault weapons. So what about the people? Well, 78% of Democrats and 45% of Republicans support the ban. And our presidential candidates? Clinton supports the ban while Trump has completely avoided answering the question. In his 2000 book, he stated that he was in support of the ban, but his current campaign website says that the government has no place dictating what kind of firearms good people should be able to buy. To be fair, people are allowed to change their opinion over time, especially 16 years, so this isn't a flip-flop, but I would wish that he would give a straight answer on the issue. So now that we've talked about what kinds of guns people should and shouldn't be allowed to buy, let's talk about who should and should not be allowed to buy them. Let's start with terrorists, because why not? Depending on which source you look at, around 80% of Americans support no-fly, no-buy. Basically what this means is if you're on the federal no-fly list or the terror watch list, you wouldn't be able to buy a gun. Some say that this would have prevented the Orlando shooting, but the guy was off the list for over a year by the time he bought that gun. But it is one of those things that just kind of makes sense though, which is probably why most Americans support it. But in order to even catch someone on the terror watch list trying to buy a gun, you need to do a background check. Background checks have been mandated since 1993 thanks to the Brady Bill. These background checks happen instantly with little to no wait. And according to the Brady Bill, you are unable to purchase or possess a firearm if you fall into one of these 9 categories. 1. You've ever been convicted of or are currently under indictment for any crime punishable by over a year of jail time. You don't have to have done the actual jail time. If the crime you were convicted of could be punished by over a year of imprisonment, this applies to you. This generally covers all felonies and many misdemeanors. 2. You're a fugitive or have an active warrant for your arrest. 3. You're addicted to a controlled substance. 4. You've ever been determined to be mentally defective or committed to a mental institution. This does not mean if you've ever been diagnosed with an affective mental illness like depression or anxiety, or if you've ever voluntarily gone to a drug, alcohol, or mental rehab facility. 5. You're an illegal alien. 6. You were dishonorably discharged from the military. 7. If you've ever renounced your U.S. citizenship. 8. If you currently have a restraining order against you by a spouse or close family member. 9. If you've ever been convicted of any kind of domestic violence. Individual states can make the laws more restrictive, but not less so. Federal law does not mandate any waiting periods, but 9 states do. These waiting periods are primarily to prevent any crimes of passion or suicide, and these states do have statistically less suicide by firearm. 74% of non-gun owning Americans support a 5-day waiting period, as well as half of NRA members, yet there is no federally mandated waiting periods. However, there is a very easy, widely known loophole around these background checks and waiting periods. Gun shows. Only federally licensed vendors are required to perform background checks. Private party sellers do not have to perform a background check as long as the buyer is someone who resides in the same state as them, and they do not know or have reasonable cause to believe the person is prohibited from receiving or possessing firearms. Private sellers are also not required to keep any record of the sale. Because of this loophole, many people have proposed universal background checks, including this guy.
I believe in background checks at gun shows or anywhere to make sure that guns don't get in the hands of people that shouldn't have them.
For the last 3 years, 90% of Americans from both parties support universal background checks. As for the candidates, Clinton supports them while Trump does not. Trump takes it even further though because he wants to increase the number of concealed carry permits and eliminate gun-free zones. Gun-free zones are often distastefully referred to as free fire zones. The idea is that since law-abiding citizens can't carry weapons, their only criminals will, and they don't have to worry about getting shot back. Schools are usually the prime example of this, and many people have advocated for the arming of teachers. So let's take a look at what that looks like in practice. This is the principal of New Life Baptist Academy in New Mexico. Keep in mind that it's being filmed under cool, calm conditions, and in fact, she knows what she's trying to do while on camera.
I'm dressed up, pearls on, minding my business, and you come to get me. Oh, here, take my purse, please. Take everything that's in it.
Whoop.
And then they're dead meat. Okay?
I don't know about you, but I don't find that woman to be threatening whatsoever, even though I know she's armed. Even under those perfect, probably rehearsed conditions, it takes her way too long to get her gun. And that's assuming that she keeps it loaded and ready to fire at all times, which is a huge no-no. The school takes it even further though by teaching its students how to prepare for an armed shooter situation, just not in the way you're thinking.
Many times, people that are at the facility are going to deal with the active shooter before the police get there. If we have to fight, we have to know what to do.
Because there's a bunch of stuff I can do here. I have them here. Boom, right in the forehead. Good.
An active shooter will keep killing people until they're out of ammunition. But we're not going to sit there and let them just murder us.
Some might see this as a great idea. I personally see this as a horrible idea, because not only are they training for something that's statistically improbable to happen, it's almost guaranteed not to happen now that it's common knowledge that that school is prepared, which may be a good thing. But I also think that it's teaching these kids to live in constant fear of guns, which I think is irrational. Not only that, but I think it may cost more lives than it saves. There is no such thing as an unarmed child coward. And trying to be a hero by rushing into a situation where there might be an armed adult is a good way to get yourself killed. The school doesn't just arm the principal and teach the students combat tactics, but also has several armed staff members at all times. Which brings us to the good guy with a gun idea. After nearly every mass shooting, one of the main arguments from the NRA is that if only there were more guns, more concealed carriers, or at least an armed citizen present, they could have stopped it. This is one of those things that might make intuitive sense, however it is in fact a myth. If you Google search how many times an ordinary citizen has stopped a mass shooting, one of the top results is a BuzzFeed article titled 9 Potential Mass Shootings That Were Stopped by Someone with a Personally Owned Firearm. One of the next results is an article debunking each one of those 9. In each case, the ordinary citizen was actually an off-duty or retired police officer, military reservist, or security guard. I would hardly consider those to be ordinary citizens, as they probably received some sort of extensive weapons training in stressful situations. For the record, if I were to stop a mass shooting, the headline would have nothing to do with my being ordinary. It would probably say something like Army veteran / famous YouTuber saves school, followed quickly by YouTuber predicts mass shooting over a year in advance. Illuminati ? This is one of those things that I'm sure has happened. This is a country of over 300 million people and gun violence happens every day. I'm sure an ordinary citizen has stopped a mass shooting somewhere at some point, but in researching this, I couldn't find a single true example. Again, I almost want this to be true, but in the few murky cases that claim it has happened, it's always been someone with an extensive firearms background like police or military, or just someone who stopped an armed robbery. Even if we include those, the number of times this has happened is so small. The longest list I was able to find had 12 cases from the last 20 years, most of them being the same 9 from the BuzzFeed article. Why has it happened so few times? To answer that question, you actually have to take a second to think about what being a good guy with a gun actually looks like. Here's a good guy with a gun from the UCC campus shooting in Oregon. Keep in mind that he's also a veteran.
You know, like I said, when we found out there was an active shooter on campus, we were going to go and see if we could intervene. Veterans are trained, be it Air Force, Navy, Marines, or Army. We're trained to go into danger, not just run away from it. So if there was something we were able to do, we were going to try to do it. Luckily, we made the choice not to get involved. We were quite a distance away from the actual building where it was happening, and which could have opened us up to be potential targets ourselves. And not knowing where SWAT was on their response time, they wouldn't know who we were, and if we had our guns ready to shoot, they could think we were the bad guys.
As he stated, he didn't run towards danger with his legally concealed weapon out of fear of becoming a target himself. If there's an active shooter and the police are on their way, they have no way of telling whether you're the good guy with a gun or the shooter. Assuming you don't get shot, you can claim you're the good guy all you want. You're still going to be detained if not arrested. But let's take this situation even further. What if there are 2 good guys with a gun coming from different directions? I shouldn't have to play the scenario out any further, you know where I'm going with this. More people with more guns might make intuitive sense, but it actually makes the situation much more dangerous. So while we let this dry to a slight haze, what can be done? Well, if the answer isn't more guns, which most Americans don't agree with, what solutions have been proposed? Well, many people think that we should look at countries like the UK or Australia, where they've enacted sweeping gun control laws and have nearly eliminated gun violence. Or perhaps we should treat guns the same way that we treat cars. All people who want to carry must be licensed, just like everyone who wants to drive a car. If you want to drive a special car, you need to have a special license that requires additional training and testing. If you want to concealed carry or use some sort of special weapon, you should also have to undergo special training and testing to get a special license. All vehicles are required to be registered and in many states require an annual safety check, and all sales are tracked through a transfer of titles. Why not treat guns the same way? If people are willing to do this for transportation, they must certainly be willing to do it for a deadly weapon. But most people agree that something like that would never happen in the United States. Why? Because the NRA and the gun lobby are so powerful. And why are they so powerful? Because their platform is simple. No changes. Universal background checks? Nope. Not letting terrorists buy weapons? Never. How about waiting periods? Not a chance. It's such a simple platform that it's nearly impossible to compromise with. Guns are also deeply rooted in the American persona and history, and many people don't see that changing anytime soon. A former British colony with a deep hunting history that used weapons to protect itself along a frontier from a perceived threat of the natives. For those of you who have been paying attention, I didn't just describe America, but I described Australia too. In 1996, Australia experienced its worst mass shooting to date, the Port Arthur massacre, after which many Australian politicians, including the Conservatives, committed political suicide by enacting sweeping gun control measures and bought back over 1 million firearms from the people. Since then, the risk of dying by gun, either by homicide or suicide, has been cut in half. If I've made anything clear to you so far, it should be that the current state of gun control in America is not working. Something has to change one way or another, more or less. To do nothing is to accept the next mass shooting. To do nothing to change the system is to say to the next mother who loses a child that we, as a country, are so unwilling to change that her loss is worth it. I know that sounds incredibly harsh, but if after every single tragedy we have the same debate and are unwilling to do anything to prevent the next one, we are tacitly accepting the inevitable. America has always been the land of if they can do it, we can do it better. If our friends across the pond have figured out a way to do it, why can't we? Something has to change, more or less, and in this election you have a pretty clear choice. So I hope when you go to the polls, if you consider gun control to be an important issue, you know better. Relax, ladies, I can only fit like 4 of you. But if you learned something, go ahead and give that like button a click. And if you'd like to see more from me, I put out new videos every weekend, so go ahead and give that subscribe button a tickle. But perhaps more importantly, with the election coming up, spreading this information is more important than ever. So share this with anyone you feel might be uninformed. In the meantime, if you'd like to check out one of my older videos, how about this one?